Ever feel like your brain's got cobwebs? Like you're trying to
Yeah.
focus, but something's just blocking the signal. Today, we're diving into a concept that explains exactly that. The five hindrances from Buddhist thought.
And you know what's fascinating about these hindrances? They're not just for, like, meditators sitting on mountaintops.
Mm.
The sources you've gathered, they make it clear these things trip us up all the time in everyday life.
Right. Like I was telling you before we started, just picking out what to wear this morning felt like one of these hindrances in action, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, for anyone listening who's new to this, what are the five hindrances?
Imagine your mind is a mirror, right? Sometimes it's crystal clear, reflecting things perfectly, but other times it's like someone smeared it with, well, let's just say life. Those smudges. That's what the hindrances are. They cloud our clarity, both in deep meditation and just trying to decide what to have for lunch.
Okay, love that analogy. So it's not that we want to be cloudy minded, these things just kind of happen.
Exactly. And the sources emphasize that these hindrances aren't some personal failing or anything. They're normal human experiences.
Yeah.
It's like that Spirit Rock piece said, it's not about blocking our path, but recognizing these hindrances are the terrain we're traveling.
Sometimes smooth, sometimes a total slog. I feel that. Okay, so enough buildup. Let's name these mental party crashers, shall we?
Let's do it.
First up, we've got sensual desire. And before anyone gets any funny ideas, this goes way beyond just wanting another slice of cake, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Think of it more broadly, that deep ache of wanting things to be different than they are right now. That sensual desire flexing its muscles.
Ooh, that craving for things to be other than they are, that's so relatable. Like, that feeling when your phone's at 1% and all you can think about is getting to a charger? That sensual desire hijacking your brain right there. What do we do about that?
Well, instead of just swatting at the craving like an annoying fly, what if we got curious about it? The Spirit Rock Source had a great point about asking yourself, what's the underlying need driving this desire? Is it truly about the phone itself, or is it about, like, staying connected, avoiding boredom, something else entirely?
Oh, I like that. It's like inner craving. What are you really trying to tell me here? Okay, so we've named it, maybe figured out the deeper need. Then what? How do we actually deal with this sensual desire thing?
One approach the sources highlighted is the concept of renunciation. Before you run for the hills thinking you have to give up all your worldly possessions, it's not quite that extreme.
Thank goodness, because I'm rather attached to my coffee maker.
Quite understandable.
Yeah.
But in this context, renunciation is more about consciously turning away from the distracting thing. So in that phone at 1% scenario, it could look like putting the phone down, maybe even out of sight, and choosing to engage with something else entirely.
Okay, so it's like, I see you craving, but I'm choosing to focus my attention elsewhere. Gotcha. Now, this next hindrance feels a little less, shall we say, fun. We're talking about ill will.
Yeah, this one's a bit thornier. We're talking anger, resentment, even that subtle, or not so subtle, wish for someone to, say, trip and drop their ice cream cone.
Okay, been there, especially in traffic. But seriously, what's going on in our brains when we're feeling this ill will? It can't all be bad, right? Don't we need some anger to protect ourselves sometimes?
It's true, anger can be a powerful motivator for change, and it's certainly a natural human emotion. But what's interesting is how the Spirit Rock piece connected ill will to our negativity bias. You see, our brains are actually wired to zero in on threats, often at the expense of seeing the good.
Wait, so you're saying our brains are hardwired to be kind of like negative? That's kind of a bummer.
It's a remnant of our evolutionary past. Back in the caveman days, being able to quickly spot danger was essential for survival. But in our modern world, this negativity bias can keep us stuck in cycles of anger, resentment, fear, even when there's no real threat present.
It's like our inner caveman is still scanning for saber-toothed tigers, even when we're just scrolling through social media and someone disagrees with our latest post. That actually explains a lot about internet arguments.
Precisely. And that's why simply trying to be positive doesn't always work. We need to address the root of the issue, which is often this ingrained negativity bias.
Okay, so how do we deal with this one? Because I don't know about you, but just telling myself to chill out rarely works when I'm feeling that surge of anger.
You're definitely not alone in that. And several of the sources, like Five Hindrances on the Buddhist Spiritual Path and How to Overcome Them, suggest cultivating the opposite compassion.
Okay, but not some cheesy, we're all one kind of compassion, right? Because sometimes people just are frustrating.
Absolutely. It's not about condoning bad behavior or anything, but rather trying to see the shared human struggle, even in those we dislike. Remember, everyone is fighting their own battles, carrying their own burdens, that be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle, quote. That's the heart of it.
Wow, that actually does shift my perspective a bit. It's so easy to forget that everyone has their own stuff going on.
It really is. And speaking of compassion, that same article had a great point about forgiveness being huge here.
Forgiveness.
Yeah.
Even for the person who cut me off this morning and then had the audacity to honk at me.
Well, it's not about condoning bad driving, but recognizing that holding on to that anger only hurts you in the long run. It's like that saying, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Oof, okay, that one got dark. Maybe we need to move on to the next hindrance for a mood lift. What's next on our list of mental party crashers?
While reflecting on forgiveness is important, it can be heavy. Speaking of heavy, let's lighten the mood and explore a hindrance we probably all know too well: sloth and torpor.
Ah, yes, the classic mid-afternoon slump. Though from what I gathered from the sources, it's not just about sleepiness, right? It's like this low energy, lack of motivation, that mental fog where you walk into a room and completely forget why you went there.
Exactly. It's that feeling of being stuck, like the man in prison analogy they used in the 5 mental hindrances and their conquest.
Okay, I'm already feeling a little sluggish just thinking about this one. So what's the magic here? Asking for a friend who may or may not be currently powered by caffeine and willpower alone.
Well, the good news is, sometimes a nap is the answer. Several sources, especially Spirit Rock, emphasize that being chronically sleep-deprived makes these hindrances so much harder to handle.
Permission to take a nap in the name of mental clarity. I'm here for it. But seriously, what if a nap isn't an option at the moment? What else can we do to combat that stuck feeling?
Beyond catching those Z's, the sources suggest a few things. First, get that body moving. Even just a quick walk around the block can do wonders.
Makes sense. It's like that saying, a body in motion stays in motion.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of nature. Connecting with the outdoor sunlight, fresh air can be incredibly revitalizing.
Oh, 100%. Sometimes just stepping outside for a few minutes is all I need to hit the reset button. But what about when we're feeling stuck mentally, not just physically?
That's where reflecting on your values comes in. The 5 mental hindrances and their conquest made a great point about this. If we don't have a clear sense of what matters to us, of what gives us purpose, no wonder we feel sluggish.
So it's less about hustle harder and more about remember what lights you up. I love that reframing.
It's subtle but powerful. And speaking of things that keep us buzzing, let's move on to a hindrance that's practically an epidemic in our modern world: restlessness and remorse.
Oh boy, this one hits close to home. It's that wired and tired feeling, like your brain's going a million miles a minute, but you can't seem to focus on anything productive. And then, of course, there's the remorse part, usually fueled by replaying that embarrassing thing you said 5 years ago on repeat.
Ah, yes, the never-ending highlight reel of our most awkward moments. And as that 5 hindrances, History, Practice, and Mastery article pointed out, this tendency is only amplified in our constantly connected world. That urge to check your phone mid-conversation, that's restlessness vying for your attention, pulling you away from the present moment.
Okay, ouch. Guilty as charged. So how do we hit the brakes on this one? Asking for a friend who may or may not be currently refreshing their inbox for the 10th time today.
I hear you. The sources offer some helpful strategies. First, remember what we talked about with sensual desire. That idea of renunciation, of consciously turning away from the distraction, that applies here too.
So maybe putting the phone in another room is a good idea, huh?
Radical, I know. But simplifying your environment, creating some space between you and those digital distractions can make a world of difference.
It's like creating a mental sanctuary, free from the siren song of notifications. I can dig it.
Good.
Yeah. So not just sitting there trying to force our brains to be quiet, but giving them an anchor, something to come back to when they inevitably wander off.
Exactly. When the mind is racing, having that anchor can gently guide it back to the present moment, back to a sense of calm.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, before we move on to the final hindrance, I'm curious, these techniques we've been discussing, are they just for dealing with these hindrances in the moment? Or do they have a more lasting impact? Like, can we actually train our minds to experience these hindrances less often?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of what makes this framework so powerful. The sources suggest that by consistently practicing these antidotes, we're not just putting out fires as they arise. We're actually cultivating new mental habits, new ways of being in the world.
So it's like building mental muscle. The more we exercise those antidote muscles, the stronger they become, and the less those hindrances can trip us up.
Precisely. It's a journey, not a destination, as they say. But with consistent effort, we can gradually shift our relationship to these hindrances, moving from a place of reactivity to a place of greater clarity, peace, and even joy.
Joy. From overcoming obstacles. That's an interesting concept. Tell me more about that.
Well, one of the sources, Buddhism.net, had a fascinating point about this. It said that being free from the hindrances isn't some bland, neutral state, but one of genuine happiness.
Really? So it's not just about removing something negative, but experiencing the positive that emerges from that liberation.
Exactly. And the five mental hindrances and their conquest put it beautifully, using some vivid imagery.
Okay, I love a good analogy. Lay it on me.
They said it's like paying off a debt that's sensual desire losing its grip. It's like recovering from an illness that's ill will losing its sting. And it's like being released from prison that's sloth and torpor losing its hold.
Wow, those are powerful images. So overcoming these hindrances isn't just about gritting our teeth and pushing through. It's about experiencing a profound sense of freedom and well-being.
Precisely. It's about rediscovering the natural joy and clarity that's always been present within us, but that's often obscured by these mental clouds.
That's beautiful. And it makes me think maybe these hindrances aren't bad in and of themselves, but rather opportunities for growth disguised as obstacles.
I love that perspective.
Mhm.
And it reminds me of another important point the sources emphasized. While these hindrances are often discussed in the context of meditation, they impact us all the time in every aspect of our lives.
It's not like these mental gremlins only come out to play when we're sitting on a cushion trying to be all mindful.
Right. They're woven into the fabric of our daily lives. And the more we can recognize them in those everyday moments, the more skillfully we can work with them.
Like that example from the five hindrances. History, practice, and mastery. That urge to check your phone during a conversation. That's not just rudeness, it's restlessness vying for attention, trying to pull us away from true connection.
Exactly. And seeing it through that lens gives us more agency to choose a different response.
Okay, that's a game changer. I never thought about it that way before. So instead of beating ourselves up for experiencing these hindrances, we can actually use them as opportunities to become more mindful, more compassionate, more fully alive.
Now you're getting it. It's about transforming these obstacles into opportunities for growth and liberation.
This has been so insightful, but we've got one more hindrance to tackle before we wrap things up, right? What's our final mental hurdle? We've still got that last mental hurdle to clear, right?
Mm.
What is it?
Yes. The final frontier. Skeptical doubt.
Okay, this one feels a little tricky because isn't questioning things a good thing? Like, don't we want to be critical thinkers, not just blindly accept everything we hear?
Absolutely. Healthy skepticism.
Yeah.
Essential for learning and growth. But as several sources pointed out, there's a difference between like the kind of doubt that motivates us to learn more and the kind that, kind of paralyzes us.
So it's less about, is this true, and more about, this might be true, but I'm too scared to even try.
Exactly. That five hindrances piece we talked about earlier, it called it the doubt that stops us. Whether it's in our spiritual practice, our relationships, our creative endeavors, it's that voice that whispers, what's the point? You'll just fail anyway.
Oof. Yeah. I know that voice all too well. It's like that feeling of, I'll never be good enough, so why even bother? Total creativity killer.
And the sources had some really interesting antidotes for this one. One that I found particularly helpful was like the idea of remembering your successes.
Wait, I love that. So instead of focusing on all the times we've fallen short, we need to remind ourselves of the times we totally rocked it.
Precisely. Because often that crippling doubt, it's rooted in a distorted view of ourselves, a highlight reel of all our perceived failures. So consciously shifting our focus to those moments of accomplishment, those times we proved ourselves wrong,
Yeah.
it can start to chip away at that negativity.
It's like building a mental wall of wins to combat that voice of doubt. I love it. What else can we do?
The sources also talked about the importance of connecting with a supportive community.
That makes a lot of sense. Because when we're isolated, those doubts can really fester and grow. But when we surround ourselves with people who believe in us, who cheer us on, it's harder for those negative voices to take hold.
Exactly. And of course, deepening our understanding of whatever we're doubting can be incredibly helpful. If it's a spiritual practice, study the teachings more deeply. If it's a skill you're trying to learn, seek out mentors and resources.
So it's a multi-pronged approach. Bolstering our self-belief, surrounding ourselves with support, and arming ourselves with knowledge. It's like creating a force field against doubt.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so we've unpacked all five of these hindrances: sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and remorse, and skeptical doubt.
Wow. It's amazing how much these seemingly Buddhist concepts show up in our everyday lives, right?
It really is.
Yeah,
And it speaks to the universality of these challenges, the fact that we all grapple with these mental obstacles regardless of our background or beliefs.
totally. But you know what's even more fascinating? How the sources framed these hindrances, not just as obstacles to overcome, but as opportunities for growth. That's what's so brilliant about this framework. It's not about beating ourselves up for having these thoughts and feelings, but recognizing them as signposts, invitations to deeper understanding.
Like that quote from Buddhism.net that being free from the hindrances isn't some bland neutral state, but one of genuine joy.
Exactly. And the five mental hindrances and their conquest had those vivid analogies: paying off a debt, recovering from an illness, being released from prison.
Those really stuck with me. It's not just about removing something negative. It's about experiencing the positive that emerges from that liberation. It's like hindrances, thanks for stopping by, but we're moving on to bigger and brighter things.
I love that energy.
Ah.
And, it makes me think, what if we approached these hindrances not as enemies to be defeated, but as, dare I say, teachers?
Ooh, teachers in disguise. I like that. What can they teach us?
Well, they can teach us about our own patterns, right? Our habits, our vulnerabilities. They can teach us about the nature of the mind itself, its tendency to cling, to crave, to wander. And perhaps most importantly, they can teach us about the incredible resilience of the human spirit, our capacity to overcome challenges and emerge even stronger.
Wow, that's a powerful reframing. So, how do we actually do that? How do we turn these teachers into opportunities for growth and transformation? I think our listeners are ready for some actionable advice.
You're right, let's bring it home. Remember that personalized challenge we discussed? This is where it comes in.
Ooh, yes. The challenge to put all this knowledge into practice. I'm ready. What's the first step?
The invitation here is to reflect on your most common hindrance. Which one resonates most strongly with you right now?
It's like figuring out our own personal, mental kryptonite. Once we know what we're dealing with, we can start developing those superpower antidotes.
Exactly. And then the real work begins. The sources encourage us to pay attention to when that hindrance pops up in our daily lives. What's the situation? What's the underlying need it's trying to fulfill? What triggers it? How does it make you feel?
So it's about getting curious, like we talked about with sensual desire. But then what? We've identified our teacher. Now, how do we learn from it?
That's where those antidotes we discussed come in. Can we meet that need in a healthier way? Can we shift our perspective, reframe the situation, choose a different response? Can we use those tools we've been unpacking to navigate the terrain of our minds more skillfully?
It's like we're becoming mental alchemists, transforming those hindrances into something more useful, more empowering.
I love that analogy. And remember, this isn't about achieving some perfect state of hindrance-free existence. That's not the goal here.
Right. Because let's be real, we're human. These hindrances are part of the deal.
Exactly. It's about recognizing these patterns, learning to work with them skillfully, and gradually cultivating more clarity, peace, and joy in our lives.
So it's a journey, not a destination. And the beauty of it is every moment is an opportunity to start fresh, to make a different choice, to learn from our teachers and keep growing. This has been an incredible deep dive full of insightful information and practical tools we can all use to navigate the ups and downs of being human.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that inspiring note, we'll leave you to ponder your own personal hindrances and how you can turn them into opportunities for growth. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of the five hindrances.